for being here on a Wednesday night. It's a rainy Wednesday night here in Tucson, and we have perfect attendance here to see Anne-Marie tell her story that she was going to tell for female storytellers, but wasn't in town and couldn't do it. I saw Anne-Marie for the first time on stage at Female Storytellers one time this summer. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the story that she told, but it was fascinating. And when I saw the way she told it and the words she had to say, I knew immediately that I needed to ask her if she would come online and do that for my meetup group. And she did in July. And we loved every minute of it. And then the one that she missed was called Secondhand. And that happened to be that they accepted my story to tell that on stage that night. And so I got up and told my nonsense, because it's always nonsense when I'm up on stage, total nonsense. And I said that and had found out then at that point that she had submitted her story, but wasn't going to be in town and she couldn't get up on stage and say it. So I immediately said, well, I know what we can do instead, and we can do it. And then every people in North Carolina and Chicago and Dallas and wherever you're from can see it, unlike the folks in Fist. Although I got to tell you, once you've been fisted and you have been to a female storyteller show, you want to come back every time. I'm going to warn you, if you go to one, it is habit forming, and there's no way that you cannot do it again. So that being said, I'm happy to unspotlight myself and instead spotlight Anne-Marie and let her tell us her story, and maybe a little bit of background, or whatever it is she feels like telling us. That's what we're going to do.
Oh, thank you, Gayla. Thanks for bringing us all together and for the opportunity to read my story here. I really appreciate everyone who came and, as you said, took time out of your Wednesday evening. I know time is precious these days, and so we're really grateful to share the space with you all. Um, and yes, so I did submit this story in October. The theme was secondhand. So the way Female Storytellers works, they have a different theme every month and invite women to share their stories on stage. And the first time I did it was last year in October. So it's been a year now. And that was my first performance on stage of a personal story. Probably my first performance on stage other than, like, fourth grade and seventh grade, whatever little choir performances and things like that. So it's a stretch for me, but also a really wonderful opportunity to share live and in person. And so this story is on the theme of secondhand. And I guess I could just launch in. Yeah, we'll just go with that. Oh, I did want to say, just if any of the thematic content feels difficult or whatever, I think people have already gone off camera, so that's okay. I was just going to invite people to take care of themselves, and if something is troublesome or whatnot, take care of yourself and we'll all be good. Okay, thanks. All right, so here we go. When I was 17, I learned from an email that my beloved former space camp counselor, Tony, had been killed in a plane crash. The subject line was, "In loving memory of Tony Kincaid." It came from another camper from our team I'd kept in touch with, who found out about the crash somehow and passed it on to my twin sister and me. Our parents were away on a trip, and my sister was somewhere else in the house, not in the sunroom where our family computer lived, so it was just me receiving that email on my own. Barely registering what the subject line could mean, I opened up the email and started reading about how 21-year-old Tony had been training to be a pilot, and it was he and the instructor pilot who died, possibly a third person, but details were sketchy. It wasn't clear who was at the controls, or if it was pilot error or just a terrible accident. I started bawling. I shrieked for my sister. I called my mom. Mom heard my hysterics and thought maybe they should cancel their trip and come home, but Dad said no, they'll be fine. I'd lost great-grandmothers by then, and my grandmother's dog had died when I was younger, but this was the first time someone close to me, someone young, a person in the prime of life, had died suddenly and unexpectedly, and I'd found out about it alone and secondhand. I had no idea how to handle it. I didn't grow up in a family that recognized or made space for grief or other deep feelings. That just wasn't the way. You went to the funeral and said goodbye and carried on with life. Not so for me when Tony died. It turns out that exposure to death secondhand is kind of like exposure to secondhand smoke. It still changes your insides. It still reshapes your cells. It still breaks your heart. There was no question of going to the funeral. We weren't that close. He'd lived in another state, and maybe, if I'm remembering right, it was only for the family anyway. But I wrote my condolences to his parents and told them how much I'd looked up to their son, and they sent me one of the prayer cards they'd had made, with an Irish blessing printed on a background of mountain grasses and blue sky. I wasn't religious or even very spiritual then, but I treasured that card. It was all I had of him now. That and an essay that my high school English teacher encouraged me to write when he heard my tale about Tony. I did. It felt good. It helped me pick up the shards of my heart and carry on with life. I was a rising senior in college when my great aunt Dolo died, from firsthand smoking, by the way. I knew she was sick with emphysema, but I was doing my life, spending a study abroad summer in Russia. I didn't go home for the funeral. No confirmation, no celebration of life with the family. I was touring the Baltic states for a week and staying in a town by the sea in Estonia the day of Dolo's funeral. I decided to buy a pack of cigarettes and a lighter and walk down to the sea. I was not a smoker, but somehow it seemed fitting to honor her, to sit and watch the water and smoke a cigarette for her. I remember as a kid being in an old hotel with my parents and telling my mom, "I like how this hotel smells. It smells like Dolo's house." "Oh, honey," Mom said, "that's the smell of stale cigarette smoke." I didn't care. To me, it smelled like love. It smelled like family. So that day by the sea, I smoked my cigarette as best I could and thought of them all together, and me here alone on the other side of the world. I hoped maybe Dolo could see me and would send me a wink or a raspy, loving laugh. And I hoped she would forgive me for throwing away the rest of the pack. It was a good ritual before I knew much consciously about the power of ritual. But it felt different from other family deaths, not being there for the collective completion. I went and visited the family afterwards, asked for and received a copy of the eulogy that Dolo's youngest son, my mom's cousin, wrote and read. But I wasn't there. She was like a grandmother to me, and I wasn't there. So I felt her death too, secondhand. It was only a few years later that I did another tour far from home, this time in Iraq. Though I never actually saw anyone die during my time there, my job as an intelligence officer was to read the reports of deaths and maiming injuries coming in every day, and then to report on them to the commanding general. For a long time, I didn't understand why I struggled so much afterwards, why I couldn't pull myself back together when other people who deployed and returned home seemed fine. It took me 10 years after leaving the military to enter a VA for the first time, after I'd broken down sobbing at an event for veterans and was encouraged to apply for help. The VA evaluated me, heard what I'd done, and told me I had PTSD. Witnessing death secondhand was enough, they decided, to warrant a PTSD diagnosis. Now we're witnessing death and violence, forced separation daily, secondhand, at home and abroad. And I mean death and separation by police, by ICE, by starvation and genocide. It does affect us. If you ever feel crazy for feeling what you feel in this world today, please know and trust being affected by secondhand death and harm is real. I'd like to share about one more loss that lives in my heart. That's Tom. He was one of my commanders when I was in Iraq. I stayed in touch with him the first few years afterwards. He wrote me a recommendation for grad school. I got to visit him and his family once when I was traveling near where he was stationed about a year and a half after we served together. I met his wife and young sons. We watched a movie together, Jumanji. He was one of the few from Iraq I saw again after leaving the military. I didn't know then how precious that time with him would come to be. Several years later, after we drifted out of touch, I was writing an essay that prompted me to look Tom up online to see if I could find out what rank he'd attained since I'd known him. I figured he was at least a captain by now, or maybe even an admiral. I found these headlines instead. Rest in peace, Captain Tom, U.S. Navy. Troubled Navy veteran's suicide ends drama in local town. Navy bomb expert kills self outside hospital. Decorated vet faced charges in 3 states and federal court. I felt the twist in my gut and the squeeze in my throat. It was like Tony's death all over again. Alone at my computer, scrolling through articles online, this time about disgrace and suicide. I called my mom, tears streaming. She didn't understand why I was so upset. I tried to explain through my sobs. "But you're okay, right?" she asked. I could hear her concern. I get where she was coming from. But I was not okay. I didn't want to recognize the man I'd known in these accounts. I wished I'd stayed in touch. In Iraq, Tom had called me Miss Corley when everyone else who outranked me just called me Corley. He'd often greeted me with a few words of Russian, the only ones he could speak, because he knew it was my college major and my passion. He once allowed me to insubordinately argue with him in front of others, because he respected me in my opinion. He didn't do the thing I wanted him to do then, and I didn't always appreciate or agree with his choices in those 6 months. But he had the kindest, gentlest heart and the softest, calmest demeanor of anyone I met out there, and he was the one who eventually took his life. I don't blame him. According to the articles I read, he was struggling hard, and instead of supporting him, the Navy dropped him. He was estranged from his wife and sons, the family I had met. Longing to see his sons again, but alone and hamstrung by an unforgiving court system, absent resources for truly restorative justice and reconciliation, he had nowhere to turn. He is so very much not the only one. Life is precious, friends, and if we're not in it together, we're not really in it. May we make good places, caring places for people in pain to turn to. Please reach out a hand when you can. Ask for a helping hand when you need one. We belong to each other. We're all we've got. Live now, love now. These are some of the things I've learned from witnessing death secondhand.